Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Brought to the Table, a podcast where we have a guest come onto the show and bring their unique ideas and perspectives to the table. I am your host, Luke Jones, and today I have a very special guest, which is essentially all the guests that come on my show. Miranda Shuler. Welcome. Welcome.
So happy
I'm
to be
clapping for
here.
you. Oh, I'm glad you're happy to be here. Are you excited to be on the show today?
Absolutely. I'm so excited to bring my ideas to the table.
Exactly. So, for those of you who do not know, I want to give Miranda a huge shout out because she did actually have a big part of like kind of rebooting everything I'm doing with the YouTube channel as well as this podcasting stuff. The very logo that you see on the podcast slash YouTube channel was actually designed by Miranda. So you can thank Miranda for that cool new logo that exists on all of my content per se. So I want to give Miranda a huge shout out. She's super awesome what she does.
Thank you so much. It's been one of my favorite projects I've ever done actually. I just love the whole idea behind it, and I love how it turned out for you.
No, it was really awesome. I was telling a few folks that, back in my days of doing contract work, this is probably like the easiest like contract thing I've ever worked with as like the client side.
Oh,
Because I know from like doing the actual work, it's just like whenever you work with a contractor, it is just such a huge pain. Um,
usually, yeah. Yeah,
yeah, and this was
absolutely.
just super smooth.
And you were one of the easiest clients I've ever had, of course, so that made it really nice.
I was like, "Oh, you did a fantastic job," and I know, I was to say there wasn't that many revisions. Um,
No, there really wasn't, which was kinda shocking.
no, I mean, Miranda figured out my vision pretty quickly, so she basically went into my brain and has sucked out all the ideas that I had, and now we have this wonderful logo for Brought to the Table.
And
So,
that is what I was trained on, is how to suck brains.
uh
That was
I did
actually
not
my
know.
degree.
Is
Yes.
that what we talk about today, is how to suck the thoughts and ideas out of someone's brain cells today?
I mean, kind of, that is psychology.
Yeah, it is. So actually the reason why I wanted to bring Miranda on today is obviously number one, she had a huge part in actually kind of rebooting this podcasting YouTube shenanigans with this awesome logo that she put together. But we are going to actually take another journey into the world of psychology because Miranda actually has some really cool ideas and stuff about this. So I'm going to let Miranda kind of just start chatting about who she is and kind of what got her into this whole psychology shenanigans, and we'll kind of go from there. So, Miranda, tell us about
Wow.
yourself.
And this is my favorite part. I love to discuss this. Okay. So I began in computer graphics technology when I was in high school. I've always had a love for video games, virtual reality, augmented reality, and I've also always had a passion for helping people. My parents told me when I was probably 13, 12 or 13, I should be in psychology because I just love to. They told me I always found the bleeding hearts, and I always wanted to help those people. And I just very recently discovered that those two things can be very much combined, and that there's a very large amount of stigma against video games and VR technology when actually it could do a bunch of help for people. So there are studies out there that show how virtual reality can help people in the psychology field, especially when understanding mental disorders, but also people with mental disorders using different types of therapy with virtual reality and augmented reality. And that just kickstarted me being really interested in how could I be a part of that field. So after finishing my bachelor's at IUPUI, where Luke works,
Hi.
I after finishing my bachelor's there in computer graphics technology, I had done a brief year of research in computer engineering where I studied actually created a cryptocurrency that would be used for space travel, which is like super complex but super cool. And with that we studied like artificial intelligence. So that all kind of led into me getting my bachelor's in computer graphics technology and me deciding that I should go on for my master's in psychology. And usually when people hear that combination, they're like, what the hell are you thinking? Combining those two things? That doesn't make any sense. But it actually does. There is a place for both, and there are computer engineers that are now a part of the psychology discussion, which is super, super cool. So my idea is to go on for my PhD and become a researcher that uses video game technology in general to help people with mental disorders.
That is I remember, so I actually got to hear a little bit about this because Miranda was recently interviewed for a part of a Spirit Week thing that I put together for my department, and I got to hear a little bit of Miranda's thoughts and ideas. And I actually thought this was a really good kind of topic that we can kind of discuss because, you know, I love video games probably as much as the next person. This year, I've probably gotten back into video games more than I ever have in the past like 2 years. And let me
Yeah.
tell you, video games I think one of the bad notions that video games get is the fact that like they're a time sucker, they're more of a distraction. That's usually how people describe them. But in reality, the way that video games have come about over the past few years, they've really had this psychological meaning to people. I talk about, when people ask me what my favorite video games of all time are, I always tell them like the reason why these games mean so much to me is because they've had such an emotional impact and have like changed my life or the way that I've, thought about stuff or the way I want to learn about more things. And like one of my examples like this year was Ghost of Tsushima, which, takes place in, Japan on the island of Tsushima. And it's about when the Mongols invaded. And like it's a huge giant lesson of like Japanese culture during that time period. And it was like one of the first big Japanese things I really wanted to get into and like learn more about that. And then it also made me realize too, like the first time in my life where like most of the characters I looked up to are mainly white males. And Jin Sakai, the main character of that game, is, of Japanese descent. And that was the first time that really hit me where like, wow, I want to be this person and stuff like that. And I want to learn more about Japanese culture outside of just watching Dragon Ball Z and, stuff like that. So like all these games just have such a giant influence on the way that we think and the way that we grow and actually like who we are as people. And I think what you talked about with like virtual reality and psychology with games, I think is like super big. What do you think really, do you think we're in an upturn towards people actually viewing like video games in this like positive psychology level?
I think it'll take more work in the industry because just as you said, there's a stigma of wasting time through video games as them being like time suckers. There's also a stigma of games promoting violent tendencies, which has never proven to be true in any case. There's tons of statistics that prove against it, in fact, but it is still a huge conversation, even in like a political sense, that video games cause a violent tendencies inside of young adults, and it's just not the case. And it's sad that that has to be the kind of thing that we have to fight because, as you said, video games impact people and teach people things that they may not experience in their world that they live in currently. So if like I said during the Spirit Week, I lived in a rural area and not much diversity in my area, and video games showed me diversity. Video games showed me different opinions and showed me different sitting inside of different people's shoes. And that's really important in both societal and like a psychological evaluation of people. It's really important to teach people those things, and it's important for us to have the empathy that video games can teach us. So I still think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the industry to prove that this is something that can be beneficial. And just as anything that is technological and technology advancing and progressive in technology, there's always going to be ups and downs, and there's always going to be good and bad. And I think it's important that we put technology in the right hands so that technology can be used for the good. So if we have the right people studying how this technology can help people and benefit people, hopefully we can go onto a much better path than what people see it turning into.
I really like that. I do, especially in the probably since this current generation of consoles, so like launch a PlayStation 4, Xbox
Mhm.
One, that type of ordeal. I do think the video games have definitely have tried to take a different approach in terms of, you know, how they actually affect people because the biggest reason why it took so long is because video games are technological art pieces. They require programming,
Absolutely.
yeah, and like architecture of the system that you're running it on. And sometimes, like, we talked a little bit about this in our very first or the second episode when we talked about tutorials in games. And half the reason why instruction manuals were so big back in the day is just the fact that games just didn't have the space to write tutorials into the game. And
Yep.
now we have the ability to render out these full length cutscenes that, actually have, they're acted out in person to show this off. And I think that's what the next, what we need to start getting this going. And I don't know. And lots of games, I've talked about these different, I would say like more social issues. I wouldn't say necessarily psychological issues. There are a few that I know have, but like games that come to mind to me that have kind of talked about like the social issue stuff a little bit is like Last of Us has been a huge one. I think that's done a
Absolutely.
great job of that.
Absolutely.
Persona 5 definitely has also talked about this, one of my absolute
Oh,
favorite games.
mine
Um,
too.
yeah, no, that one, especially for a younger generation of, children growing up, like that one definitely hits hard. But
Mhm.
I don't really think any games really kind of, because I know you talked about people with different mental disorders. I don't really think there's any games that talk about that. I think
Well,
there's one, I forget the name of it,
there
but
is one. I'm sorry to interrupt, sorry to
no, you're
interject,
good. No,
but
please interrupt.
it makes me really excited because there is one that's out there on the market, and it's a version of Hellblade, and it's Sonya's journey, and
That's the one I was thinking of.
the
Yeah.
entirety of the game is set inside her schizophrenic mindset, and they actually had people with diagnosed schizophrenia helping the writers write that game. So when you're sitting inside the game, and I'm sure if you've played it, you've heard it. If you play it with headphones, you actually hear voices around her, and you get to actually experience what it feels like to be someone with schizophrenia. And that's something that is so important because then it helps you understand. I mean, it just gives you that empathy to understand someone that may think differently than you. And that's such a big stigma in the world of mental disorders is we see people with a mental disorder and we imagine they are evil when in fact they just think differently, and it's kind of a superpower. And that's kind of how Hellblade portrays it. And that's, I don't know, that was the first one that came to my mind was Hellblade.
Yeah, Hellblade was the one I was thinking of. I
Absolutely.
kept forgetting it because I know it was the studio that I can't believe it, that would made the DMC game, so that Devil May Cry
Yeah.
game where it was emo
Yep.
Dante, it's the same
Yes.
studio. Uh, no, yeah, I have not played Hellblade, but I have seen playthroughs of Hellblade, and I have to give them huge kudos to that because a lot of what there's has been this huge thing in games nowadays with accessibility and how they actually have folks with the different accessibility
Right.
things that they have to tackle, whether it's someone who is deaf, whether it's blind, and how they actually are bringing those folks in to see how they can tackle these problems in
Exactly.
in video games. And I know, like what you said about the schizophrenia with Hellblade, they actually had to bring folks in to help kind of really script that game out. What do you think is really holding folks back from doing more of that though? Because I feel like especially nowadays when now granted we are in 2020 and 2020 is 2020. Having, obviously you gotta have people come in, talk about this stuff, but like what do you think is holding people back from having more of these types of concepts talked about in video games?
Fear. It's always fear.
Really? Is that all it boils down to?
That's honestly in my heart. That's what I feel. So, and I
Mm.
just, that's from like personal experience. So, just like transparency, I was diagnosed when I was 17 with borderline personality disorder. And when I told my family that, they looked at me and they said, I could never imagine you've been diagnosed with a mental disorder. You're so nice. And I'm just like, okay, people with mental disorders aren't mean. We're not evil people. We just think differently. And I mean, it just boils down to like, we have such a fear in our society of accepting that people may think differently. We have a fear of not understanding how people think. And we have a fear of not understanding. You can see that in racism, you can see that in sexism. We just have a fear of things that we cannot understand. And with that fear comes a lack of conversation, and which just builds more fear and misunderstanding. And it's just an endless cycle that it is pointless and doesn't need to be that way at all.
No, I, you know, I 100% agree with you. And the thing is, like, we talk about fear, and obviously we're talking about fear and kind of in a negative reinforcement way, where essentially people are like, "Well, I'm scared, so I'm not going to do it." But it's also the fact of like, I think with me personally, I remember back when I was in undergrad, I did a study about how to take the whole concept of Skylanders and help it with people who had anxiety and depression.
Oh, that's
And
so fun.
yeah, and it was a really cool project to really work on because there was a lot of different things that you had to think about with that and how to approach that. But really, what it came down to is, I think people are just scared because they just don't know how to go about it. It's like you don't want. It's hard. I'm trying to figure out how to say this appropriate, so I apologize for those of you listening as well as you, Miranda. It's because I want to make sure I say this correctly because I don't want to offend anybody.
Of
It's
course, of
more
course.
yeah, it's like, you obviously have to talk to the people who suffer from these different conditions. And,
Absolutely.
sometimes depending on the condition, that can be a scary thing to do. Um, it and because everyone has different levels of different of these different mental disorders.
Right.
And sometimes it's severe, sometimes it's not so severe. And usually, especially in video games, you want to try to talk about it in a most severe way possible that's not shoving it down your throat.
Right.
Because I think that's also kind of what a lot of games run into is that, and people say this, is that, like when a game is trying to bring out like a message and they're trying to tell this story and trying to tell you this moral message, rather than trying to tell it to you in this nice methodical way, it's more like, all right, we're taking this idea and we're punching you in the face with it constantly throughout the entirety of the story, you know? And that's not necessarily the right way to do it. I mean, granted, sometimes it's still good to hear that message, but um, you want to make it sure that it's impactful and meaningful to a large audience. And that's something I can just see how hard that can be. That it's
Like,
incredibly difficult. And I don't think it's necessarily just even from a fear perspective. I think it's just actually trying to really nail that. And obviously, Hellblade did a fantastic job. But I can only, many games have tackled, anxiety and depression,
mhm,
but I don't think a game has really made you really feel like what it feels like to have those, if I'm not mistaken. Unless you can
to
correct me.
I would have to agree with that actually. I was thinking of oh my gosh, Life is Strange, that
Oh,
series.
yes. I
That
love Life is
series,
Strange.
yeah, that series, both of those games have really affected me pretty hardcore. But I still don't feel like you can cross that bridge of like, even though I've played the second Life is Strange, I can't ever say that I understand what it feels like to be in a Hispanic's shoes living in America right now.
Right.
I can never say that. I especially coming from like a privileged white percentage, I cannot say that with any kind of
No.
clarity. But I can say that that game brought light to the knowledge that I was never given. And I think that that again is just the key that we're looking for inside the lock is giving the people knowledge that they may have not received before. And I think that goes even beyond video game technology. I think that goes into like our schools. Like just even recently we've been taught in our schools how to handle someone who is suicidal and how to see signs of it, or someone who is depressed, or someone who is, being abused at home. And that's something that like my parents were never taught in school. So when they had to deal with me going to therapy, they were like, what the hell is wrong with you? You have nothing to be worried or stressed about. When in reality, it doesn't work like that. So it
No.
comes down to like just education. And I think as much as video games can do in part of that, that's still an important step, even, if you're not crossing the boundary of shoving it down someone's throat, but you're still telling a story that is valid and should be learned, I suppose.
No. Yeah, it's such a difficult balance because it's just like, you want to talk about these messages and have these characters with these different, backgrounds of who they are, whether they're part of, different race backgrounds, different sexuality
Right.
backgrounds. And it's like, I think one of the biggest things I kind of struggled to understand the past few years, but I finally kind of got it a few years ago, was, when Marvel was really trying to push this giant diverse roster of characters, because I grew up as a Marvel kid liking all these different Marvel characters. And the thing is, I never really got it because I was more viewing it from the perspective of, oh, they're no longer focusing on the characters I really enjoyed growing up with. But in reality, what it was, it's the fact that, we need characters of representation of different backgrounds, of different sexualities, and what have you. I mean, that's why Miles Morales is such an important character in Marvel right now because he represents
Absolutely.
such a huge population of folks. And don't get me wrong, Peter Parker Spider-Man is always gonna be my favorite Spider-Man. But that's because I, as a white privileged male, look up to someone who looks like me. You know,
Right.
those folks, of Hispanic and Black heritage, they need their Spider-Man to look up to, and that is Miles, and Miles is also just as fantastic of a character, and that's why he exists, like, he is, and it's not just like, "Oh, I am this, lack of better word, token character." Like, it's not just he's those things, he has, like, a family that revolves around that cultural background. I was looking at the Marvel, Miles Morales game that's coming out for PlayStation 5, and how they rebuilt Harlem and New York City, and how that's, like, a representative culture thing, and, like, people were looking at it and, like, tearing up in the trailers, and, like, I didn't grow up in that portion of New York City, but, like,
Right.
that is important to people, and, like, that understanding and that psychology of what that means, and, like, it goes back to what you talked about of, we didn't grow up seeing that stuff, or we don't understand what that's like. We both come from relatively rural areas, so we don't have that perspective, but when you get to see that, it's kind of why I really like what I'm doing with this podcast, is really it's about bringing new perspectives on for us to learn something new. And I
Absolutely.
wish there was more ways that games could do that, because I think the problem is that some folks look at that and feel like goes back to the shoving down the throat thing, but I don't think these games are doing it. I'm just trying to figure out how, you can even change the mindset of someone who's going to think like that, because that's what the games should do. And that's what I really think what Hellblade did really well was, like, we're not trying to put this message in front of you, the entirety of it. We're trying to make you experience it, which I think is a lot different than most games do.
And I think the really important factor in what goes into those games, into the, like, miles, and what goes into those stories, the fact that they don't just there's a lot of problems in, like, psychology in the industry right now, because there's a lot of people that are of white heritage that try to speak for those that are of other heritage, or people that are, neurotypical, that try to speak for people that are neurodivergent, when in reality, like, things like Hellblade and, like, the new Spider-Man, they had real people that had lived those lives, helped to create those films and those pieces, and those are the voices that should be projected right now. It should be the people that haven't experienced that, or haven't sat in those shoes. It should be the people that have experienced that are the ones that are projected into the stories. And that's what makes an incredible story. And I think I really like that you admit that you had to, like, have a learning curve with that. I really appreciate that, because I think it's important for us to all admit that we had learning curves, because again, like me growing up in a rural town, I didn't have the experience that I have now, just like coming from Indianapolis. That taught me a lot. Like, that was a culture
Yeah.
shock. And I think what really kicked it in for me was when I was working at my old high school as an IT assistant. I had one of our coworkers who was Hispanic, and she looked at me and said, I had drawn a Hispanic woman in one of my paintings, and she looked at me and said, "It's so nice. I've never felt represented before." And that
Wow.
just, like, kicked me in the face, because I just realized, like, I can't imagine watching TV every day or playing video games and not ever seeing myself. Can't
Right.
imagine living that life. And that's so incredible that there are people that don't have that here. And I think it's so important to rise those voices up. And I think that's what those pieces do that you're discussing. And I think that's what makes an incredible piece.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, because, with, in 2020, talking about, like, Black Lives Matter and having more racial understanding, I think, you know, I, part of that is admitting when you don't know enough.
Right.
And that's, like, what I learned with the Marvel thing, was because I really admit I wasn't a huge fan of Marvel for a while because of the stories that they were telling, but when I actually took the time to actually understand these characters that they were trying to tell the stories of, it made me realize more and more, like, why this was important. I think another, I talked about Miles, but another great Marvel character, recently, I think they've done a fantastic job with, is Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel.
Oh
Um,
my gosh. Yes.
she is absolutely fantastic. Um, and it's just like, you don't like those superheroes, they represent a whole different audience of folks, and it just requires you to be like, all right, I don't know enough about this. It wasn't that I wasn't interested. I just never took the time to go research it. And now it's like, now I'm bidding on getting a better understanding of the culture that these folks come from, and, like, what they do, and why some of this stuff is, like, meaningful, or why this is scary. It really kind of puts it in perspective. And part of it is admitting when you don't know enough, or you're just deciding not to go forward. And once you have those moments where like, I need to better understand this, like you want to go out and seek it. And I know that's what The Last of Us did when they were doing a lot of the story writing for Last of Us 2. Because obviously there is a very diverse group of characters in that game that represent a lot of different backgrounds, from race to sexuality to the way they identify. And I remember Neil Druckmann had talked about in interviews of how they actually interviewed folks in the studio that identified in all those different places to make sure that they represented how those characters should feel. And
Like,
the thing is, it's part of saying, I don't know enough and I want to find a way to represent this in the best way possible. So it's asking questions. It's the funny joke I tell my students all the time where it's just and when they're like, I don't know something, and I'm like, why aren't you asking questions? And this is like the part where we have to become students, not just in the classroom, but like actually in the world socially, to ask those questions to figure out more knowledge.
yeah, actually, that was I so one of my first classes in my master's class so far has been called Foundations of Psychology. And the first paper we had to read was entirely written about the deconstruction of your self identity and how, as a psychologist, and just I believe as a human on the earth, you are constantly deconstructing and rebuilding your self identity. And if you're not, you're in a standstill because it's very important to understand you don't know everything, and it's very important to understand you should be asking questions. Don't ever feel wrong for questioning. Don't ever feel wrong for changing your mind because it's continuous to deconstruct who you are and continue to rebuild. And if you don't do that, then you'll be at a standstill and society would never move forward. It's so important to continue to have like empathy and understanding towards, maybe I'm not as smart or as knowledgeable on a subject as I thought I was. Let me try and get better.
No, I mean, like, you even talk about that, I guess in a more lighthearted sense of it, it's kind of the way or the reason why, like, when you're growing up as a kid, like, you like certain things as a kid, but as you get older, you're, like, deconstructing yourself to, like, you're liking new things, you're meeting new people, you're making new friends and stuff like that, and part of that is that deconstruction of yourself that you have to take the time to do that because you're not going to be 45 years old and still like playing with building blocks all day. I mean, granted,
Yep.
you'll probably find a different way to do it. Maybe you like architecture, so that's what you do.
I
But
was about to say, you still play with Legos on your
I was gonna
stream,
say
so
I was saying the factor. But I mean, even then, even in that extent, that's just like I just watch. I see so many. Like I remember like teaching at the middle school, high school level, and like watching students kind of grow through those years as you would see them progress over time, and then eventually they would actually get to like freshman level college, which was insane to see that growth. But you just see them change and evolve as people. Like they wear different clothes, they hang out with new groups of people. Like that's part of that. I always talk about going on the journey, and like
yep.
figuring out who you want to be. And like you're never really done going on the journey, but
No.
you have to make sure that you're going on it though. That's the big thing.
Absolutely, you should never be stagnant, and it should never be I don't know, that maybe just be, like, my perspective on life, though. I never wanna be comfortable. I don't wanna be comfortable. I don't wanna be content. I'd much rather be uneasy and learning than just content with where I am, because I do wanna be a part of, like, progressing society and helping people, and I feel like if I just stay content all my life and never change, how am I supposed to be a part of anything, I guess?
No, I mean, I think that's actually a really good point you bring up because there's this level of, I mean, like you talk about fear and then you talk about content, or we can even kind of phrase it into just being comfortable. And
Right.
I think that's honestly why, we get stuck in these groups because things make us feel comfortable and we're not scared. But then it's like you aren't learning anything new.
Exactly.
And
That's
it's like,
exactly right.
how do you balance that, I guess? Because obviously if you want to continue to learn and progress in your life, you need to be scared of things. But then at the same time, it's like, you want to be comfortable. You want to know that next day you can wake up and, you can pay your rent. You have food to just make sure you can eat. You're getting enough sleep. You're going to go to work and you're not going to get fired. That type of
Course,
thing.
course. I think I think the balance in that could even stem from understanding that some people don't have that. I think that's at least my balance is for me to wake up and understand I am comfortable. I have a roof over my head. I lay in a bed every night. some people don't have that. And I want
Right.
to continue to work until I can help at least one person have that like I have that.
I mean, you're not wrong. That's what I feel like that's what we all try to. I mean, a lot of the folks I've had on the show, I think we all kind of think the same way. So maybe at some point I got to have some crazy person on the show to talk elsewise. But I think we all are here because we want to help people in some shape or form, whether it's big or small, and we're all trying to better ourselves and find ways to do that. Which
Absolutely.
I think is, I mean, it's still a difficult task. I mean, as a teacher, it's so difficult to
Oh
help
my
people
gosh.
understand. Um, and that's a whole psychological battle I fight every day.
Of
Um,
course.
which I think is so difficult.
Yeah, of course. I'm actually, which I'm not a teacher, but I have a substitute's license, and just being a substitute is draining to me because it's just every day you see kids that you cannot help enough. And so I can't imagine being like a full-time professor or teacher. That would just, I mean, how do you cope with that, Luke?
You're asking good questions. Honestly, it's not for everybody. And I remember, so it's funny because for those of you who don't know, I'm a relatively young full-time lecturer at a university, IUPUI, and I got hired when I was 23, which is absurd and is never heard of usually in any university environment. And a lot of the people that from my program that were in undergrad want to go do a master's degree to go teach. And what a lot of them ended up realizing is they didn't like teaching. And I do think that there's some of that is you get put in that situation, you get really scared. You talked about the whole suicide, like I remember first day, like one of the first things I had to do before I started teaching my first full like semester full time was I had to fill out that like suicide prevention thing of like what I'm supposed to do as the instructor when you get told that thing. And like that's something I think about every single day, and like I get messages from students about personal things all the time. Don't need to list any specific ones, but it it's it is draining. It hurts sometimes, especially because you wanna sit there and help those people, like, but you just there's not enough you can do, especially when it's something a little, you know it's out of your reach. But kind of the best way I figure about is, like, just give them the best opportunities that they can, and, like, that's whether it's, like, give them a better way to get more points on an assignment or be like, "Hey, extra credit," or, "Hey, let me show you this really cool opportunity to maybe get an internship," or even sometimes just in the classroom, just like I did this week, I just pulled out my guitar and I just started playing guitar because I was just like, "Why the heck not?" It just providing some levity and also doing it in my own life too, of making sure that I have time to process and like take care of myself too. Cause I think, 2020 has proven to a lot of us in all sorts of different ways. And I'm not trying to completely blame it on the number of the year, but um, it definitely has made me have to force myself to reflect and process more. And I think that's part of why people are so feared to even talk about these different concepts with psychology. Um, and like with depression, anxiety, and things that you're scared of is that you just don't want to think about it. I had Zach Pinson's on the show recently, to talk about psychology, and kind of one of the things he talked about was like these are just ideas that we implant in our heads to not think about stuff. It's like a comfort mechanism. And that
Like,
was one thing I actually learned from that show that I've been kind of doing a lot recently is trying to make sure that and I've been doing this a lot this year, but really reflect on what's happened and process it. So that way you can kind of move forward with it because there has been so many weird freaking situations with your teaching and life and all that stuff, but really kind of how you get through it is just like reflect on it, don't let it eat at you, and try to move on. And it's different for different people on how you do it. Like I can't sit here and tell you, here's all right, you gotta wake up and eat your alphabets, drink a glass of milk, take a shower, use your Irish Spring, brush your teeth.
this is
That's not how
it.
that works.
This is how you live. You have to follow these exact rules.
Exactly. This is the exact rules that you have to follow to ensure that it will all work out. No, please don't. Please don't. Also, shout outs to alphabets. Like that cereal does not get enough credit. It's the better oh god. Oh god. Anyway, it's a really good cereal. Go get it. But there you go.
It'll
See, we
solve
have
all your
tangents on the show,
problems.
Miranda. So when we start talking about random stuff,
I love it. I'm here for it 100%. But
awesome.
I absolutely agree with what you're saying, though. I think if 2020 has taught me anything, it's just it's proven to me that how important it is to just be honest, and that's not even outwardly, that's just to yourself as well, to be honest
Right.
when you need a break, to be honest when you're going through something. And I found that being honest with myself has made me more honest with people around me as well. Like even just telling people, "Hey, I can't handle it today," or "Hey, I need a break today." I mean, there's nothing better you could do for yourself is just to allow yourself to be a human. And that's really hard sometimes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's just like you want to, I've people ask, because obviously people know me from the Disney villainous community, and people always want to like play games with me and stuff like that. And I love the fact that people want to go play games with me, but like it's just I can't play games all the time. Like literally, what
Yeah,
I've actually been doing recently, I've been getting really back into music, and like music has been helping me kind of reflect and relax a bit more than just playing games. So it's just
that's
like
so
some
wonderful.
it's been fantastic, let me tell you. I've actually been thinking about buying a bass guitar. Um,
Oh, I
and
hope you do. I hope you buy your bass
I am
guitar.
gonna
That's
probably buy my
wonderful.
that's what I'm gonna probably do. But, it's definitely, like, helped me reflect, but it's like, it sucks to say no to someone, and I think that's it also goes back to what we talk about with fear is, like, you never wanna let someone down. You're scared that as soon as you tell
Yup.
someone no or, "Hey, I can't do something today," like, you all of a sudden you just broke someone's heart, you ruined someone's day. And some people don't have a problem saying no, and that's also great, but it's also like, yeah, sometimes you're saying no because you're like, "Hey, I really just need to not do anything that requires talking to people. I need to go drink some water and relax and binge a TV show and just chill." And it's just okay to say
Exactly.
that.
And I think, like PSA, I feel like if you have someone in your life that can't handle you saying no and can't handle you needing to have time for yourself, that's not a person that you need in your life. Like, and it's so funny that we're having this podcast and discussing that because I just had like a falling out with a friend because she could not handle that from me. And that's like not on me. I have to be allowed to be a human. Everyone has to have time, and that's okay. And you don't need validation for it. Validation is for parking, like that book that I love says. Validation is for parking, and you don't need that. Like you if you need a break, take a break. And it's really hard for me too. I completely agree. It hurts me to disappoint people, and it hurts me if I feel like I haven't been productive. It really bothers me. I tell everyone else around me, like, it's okay for you not to be productive. It's okay for you to take a break, but I don't tell that to myself. And that's been a learning curve for me. But it is okay.
No, absolutely. I am definitely we probably kindred spirits in terms of our productivity.
Yep.
Where essentially like I'm the type of person that I always like to do things, but sometimes like, for me, like I feel like I'm being productive when I'm doing stuff for work or doing schoolwork or designing a game or doing something for YouTube or a podcast. I feel productive doing that, but then there's a point where I'm just like, all right, that's enough. Need to do something
Exactly.
else. And especially since I'm so always kind of glued to a screen, I've had to make a very big effort this year in particular because of just being at home all the time to do things that don't involve you looking at a screen. I mean, it's funny that you bring up the Legos, and like Legos have been a huge part of that where I just like just something fun to do where I'm not looking at a screen, or I'm actually like playing the music and going out, and exploring more a bit too, trying out different restaurants and stuff like that. Obviously being safe, wear your fucking mask, people.
Ask, please. Wear your mask.
Yeah, yeah. I say it. I don't swear often on this show, but I will say it when it comes to wearing a mask.
Yeah,
But yeah. So, doing things, and it's different for everybody too, because, there's different, I think someone doing something fun is different for everybody. Like someone's version of fun could be playing a video game. Someone's version of fun could be just relaxing on the couch and listening to music or whatnot. And I think it's also understanding that, hey, just because, maybe Miranda and I have different ways of just doing stuff and how we are productive and how we have fun, that's okay. Like it's completely okay that we don't do the same things. Just because person A that you're friends with, like it's cool if they want to go do something else to relax. You don't have to do the same stuff. We're not all the same people.
absolutely. And I definitely feel that. I think we might be kindred spirits because I I have so many friends around me that are very extroverted, and the things that let them let loose are going out and having fun together and like spending time together. I am not that person, and I've always had friends. I guess not now in my life because I have great friends now, but growing up, I always had friends that saw that as very lame. Like you don't like to do anything. You're kind of a buzzkill. But it's like that's just who I am. I'm very introverted. I need time to relax and unwind, and I need to recharge my batteries, and that is okay. And if someone cannot accept that, I'm not your person.
Are we human or are we dancers? My signs are
Yeah,
vital. My hands are cold.
exactly,
I love it. I love that
exactly.
song so much. No, I definitely like. I think that is I actually 100% Miranda. I've literally kind of went through something very similar earlier this year with that same exact experience. And honestly, what it boiled down to was, you know, if two people just cannot just accept the fact that, hey, like if you don't want me to relax in the way that I do, or however you want to have fun, like that's like if you can't accept that, then you don't need to hang out or whatnot. But I will say is that just because that if someone doesn't like to do the same type of stuff that you do to relax or recharge, that doesn't make them a bad person. I think that's also something we got to keep in mind. Not to say that maybe the way they handle the situation or whatnot, could be right or wrong, but like just because someone doesn't like to do the same things you do, doesn't make them a bad person. I think that's something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I know it's funny because you talk about growing up. I grew up in a very small private Catholic school, and I believe it or not, of a class of 30 students in my grade, I was the only kid that was a nerd. I was the
Dude,
kid where everyone wanted to go to the movies or go bowling on the weekends after we get out of our private school clothes and our uniforms and whatnot. And I'm like, I want to go play the new Sonic game. I want to go play the Wii. That's what I did.
okay.
Um,
Yeah. We
I was
grew up
that.
in this we grew up in the same life. I literally graduated with 36 people, and I was always like, I'm going to spend the weekend playing Mario with my dad, but thank you.
Exactly. No, that was literally the way I operate. And like for the longest time was always so difficult because like, growing up, I always thought like, people just thought really badly of folks that liked that nerdy crap. But really what it boiled down to is it was just the wrong people. And you will eventually find the people that you're supposed to be with and like hang out with and have fun.
Yeah, and we should totally normalize the idea of like just because you don't vibe with someone doesn't mean they're a bad person, like you said. Like, just because we're not close, just because we don't vibe, we don't have the same like energy or whatever, doesn't mean you're a bad person or I'm a bad person. We're just not meant to be like connected in that way, and that's okay too. Everyone has their own speed and their own maturity, I guess, and that's completely fine.
Right. I know because I assume Miranda, we both grew up in probably very small communities where everyone kind of knows each other and the kind of the whole thing, it's a popularity contest of, all right, if you have the most friends, you're successful.
Exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
in my town, it was, like, if you have the most friends and you play basketball. That was really big in my town, like, if you're a sports person, you're
Yes.
definitely more successful, and I was just like, "Okay."
Okay.
I
That's
I'm
that's
a
fine.
yeah, I'm a little weird art kid, that's not gonna work for me, but that's
Yeah,
okay.
believe it or not. So back in my day, I made a lot of card games on Microsoft Publisher. That's what
Oh,
I
I
used to
love
do.
that.
That's what I used to do. That was before I understood what Adobe was. So I would literally jam out on my parents' printer, printing out these cards and like double like backing on them and stuff. And that's what I was that kid. Everyone was like, let's go to a football game or whatnot. And I'm like, I gotta go make a card game on my parents' computer.
Is so
So
pure. We would have been friends. We would have been friends in
I
high
know we
school.
probably would have been. Different lives though. It's just what
Yeah,
happens.
it
It's
is
all
what
about the
happens.
discovery. And I think that's part of it too, is just like, growing up, I never thought there was gonna be people like me ever. And then like going into college and like doing all this community stuff with like my podcast and Disney Villainous and even like doing all the teaching stuff, like you will find your people. You will.
People. It's so true. Like when I first started at IUPUI and I found out that there was a thing, like a national group, an organization called Society of Women Engineers. I was like, oh my gosh, there are people like me? There's like a national group like me? That's insane. And that's how I found a lot of the people that are still my friends to this day. Just because, I mean, you're right. You'll find your people. There's such a big world out there.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends out in Washington, or actually not Washington, in Oregon and Louisiana and Texas and all over the place. And like I still talk to them on a semi-regular basis. I check in on them and stuff. And like you will find your friends. And those are the friends that you like the most meaningful. Because I think one thing I definitely learned, little I think I might have told the story before in a podcast, but grew up in Indiana, went out to Seattle one summer to intern, came back, realized how much I hated the freaking state. And I blamed it on the people. But really, what I was trying to blame it on was the fact that I was not surrounding myself with the correct people.
Yeah.
And that's what it made me realize that it's not. And granted, there is a little bit of like where you are in the country or the world and like your location, the types of people that are there. But it's really who you decide to surround yourself with. And that's how you really kind of find your friends and the people that you really care about and stuff like that. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. And don't be like me and just blame it on the entire state. That was not a good time in my life because I was a very angry man. I can my brother can attest to this. He was on the last week's podcast, and he can attest that Luke was not a happy person. um, but yeah, don't be me. Don't beat me in
Yeah.
2016. Um,
In 2016.
yeah, don't be Luke in 2016. I give Kratos a run for his money at being the most pissed off person alive. So, but
I mean, I was the exact same way, and I was the same way, but with my town. I always blame my town. Like, oh, I hate this place. It's all this place's fault. And I was like a super angsty, angry teen, and I still have a lot of anger in me towards the world, but
oh yeah,
I
and we
it's
all do.
not in the same precedence as it was during high school. And it doesn't. It's more of just like, again, there's fear in being honest, and being honest is what attracts the right people to yourself. If you are honest about yourself and who you are, you'll find your people and you'll find who you're comfortable with. And I feel like this podcast just has a theme of honesty and fear and how they go hand in hand.
Yeah, no, I mean, like that's what it's kind of funny because we talked about a lot of different things, and honestly, that's really what this podcast has been about. Is just honesty and fear with just yourself.
Yeah,
Like being honest with your friends, being honest with yourself, and like knowing what you're scared of, and like talk. And I think it's like people talk about like, oh, like I'm sad, I need to go talk to somebody, and like sometimes yeah, that's really important. I know for myself that doesn't always work to talk to someone about how I feel, but I know a lot of other people feel that way, so I do not want to discredit them. But it's
of
also
course.
important to actually have that conversation with yourself, I think
Yeah.
too. I mean, I literally actually did that this morning of the recording of this show in the shower, where literally I was just thinking about something and I was literally talking, literally like a crazy person talking to myself about it out loud because that's just how I like to kind of go about how I do things. But like that's important because now that idea that I had in my head that was going to probably lurk in my brain all day, I kind of pressed it out, talked it out into myself for about 10 minutes, waited till the water went cold, and that was good. But you need to
Exactly.
take the time to talk to yourself though, and also if you have someone to talk to them about it as well, because you wanna let your people you care about know how you're feeling too.
Yeah, of course. That's really important too. But I'm the same sort of person where I'm not a outward processor. I process inwardly very much. And sometimes that can hurt the people that are really close to me because I'm very if something's really going on, I'm pretty quiet about it. I won't mention it to anyone. But that's how I best process. And I think that's why I want to go into psychology because I want to help people process on their own by using like a technology that can help them process and help them meditate or help them understand themselves. I think that brings the feeling of I am processing on my own, but something is helping me and it's not something that is a human that can judge me because that's a whole other thing into fear is judgment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think honestly what it boils down to with everything, even, like, when you're developing it is, like, I can only imagine the people making Hellblade, how they were so scared to put that out in the
Oh my
public and be
gosh.
all right, every person who is dealing with schizophrenia, like, how are they gonna look at this game? Like, are they gonna sit here and
Right.
nail us over the head saying this is not how it's supposed to be? you know?
Exactly. Or are they gonna feel generalized? Are they gonna feel like they're stuck in a box that doesn't apply to them, which is another, like, huge problem in the industry of psychology is sticking people into boxes that don't exist because
Right,
everything is
no.
a spectrum and a sphere, and it doesn't work like that. And yeah, I totally agree. How could you not be afraid when you're making something that profound that you wouldn't, upset someone or make someone feel crowded or lost?
No, I mean, I do that every day with teaching. I always tell people I always try to be incredibly careful about what I say and make sure that however I say things is super important. I mean, like, is some people might find this really small, but like when I teach, I always say folks instead of guys because I learned a long time ago that guess what? Guys is referring to boys,
Right.
not girls or people who do not identify. So,
Absolutely.
that's why I use folks because that's all inclusive. And it's little things like that that go a long way of making people feel more welcome in your environment. And I try to do that in my teaching, and I know I don't do a perfect job at it. And I tell people to call me out when I do stupid things.
Yeah,
Because I don't want to be that person. And if I say something that's wrong, I want someone to correct me and be like, hey, I know you didn't mean it. It's how I felt when you said that. I'll be like, okay. Thank you for
yeah.
telling me. So now because that's the part of it too, is like I tell people all the time is like, if I say something stupid, call me out, please. Like, that's the only way I'm gonna learn, or else I'm gonna just keep saying the same dumb shit all over.
Exactly, and they're very obviously that goes back to, like, the idea of deconstruction of your self-identity and yourself in general is, like, there are things that you won't even understand, especially with our upbringing, there are things that you might do out of habit that you don't understand is offensive. Like, and
Right.
I've even been corrected on that. When I worked at GameStop, I used to every like group of people that would come in the door, I would say, "Hi guys, how are you today?" And that like just like you, and that's where I learned like you can't do that. That doesn't apply to everyone, and you're generalizing, and it doesn't work like that.
No, yeah, no, it just you gotta really be as like you it's I don't want to say like because obviously yes, be inclusive, but really what it boils down to is just be open and try to learn to be inclusive. Because that's
Absolutely.
what's gonna help you develop these different techniques in order to approach, kind of wrapping it as a whole to back to what you were talking about with like building these games that are for helping folks with, disorders is you want to give yourself techniques to when you're scared to be able to find ways to, not be scared or how to approach it and like be like, all right, folks, I'm here to learn about people with severe depression. I'm gonna not gonna lie, I know jack shit, but you folks are here to tell me how to be better at this. And if I screw
Absolutely.
up, you need to tell me. And that is super hard to do. And it's taken me years to be that upfront and honest. I do that every time I teach where I'm like, all right, guys and gals. That's also another thing I do. If I say guys, I try to switch back to it and say gals as well with that. That's something I do. Keep that in mind in the back of your pocket for those of you who do public speaking. I'm on a trick or two. But like, all right, folks, correct me if I say something stupid. This might be a complete shit show today. And that's just part of being honest and just, that takes time to do. Like that was not something I back 5 years ago, I could say, oh, I'm a very confident human being. Now I'm like, all right, come at me with a gun. I'm good. I'm ready to go. Shoot me with your worst questions, people. Come on.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And
exactly.
I think that's so important just to be open to again, just being open to learning, just being and I think that's such a difficult task when it comes to because if you think about it, everything in our lives involves psychology. Every job that you do will involve some sort of psychology and the understanding of people and the way that they think and the way that they work. And a lot of employers are even using like Myers-Briggs tests and things of that nature to understand how to better understand their employees and how to better help them and communicate with them, which is great. But you can't change people's mindsets
No.
on being open-minded, and that's a really tough thing to overcome. You can't make someone listen to you, you can't make someone try and understand or have empathy for another side, but I think it's just important that you try and be honest when you're wrong, like you said, and take accountability if you need correcting, and take accountability if you need to change something. And I wish there was a way to make everyone feel that way, but I know there's not.
No. And that's part of it too, and that's something I've definitely had to learn is that like we can sit here and just hope that everyone is going to be okay. Like we're gonna be able to teach the people these great values, and you can't force that on everybody. I know,
No,
especially from a
yeah.
teacher perspective, you know, especially as a younger person teaching, like I want to be able to drill into everyone's heads how to be the most kick-ass app developer possible, but that I
Heck
can't do
yeah.
that for everybody. It's just impossible. And part of that is just accepting that and knowing
Yeah.
that going in, it's just like, well, not everyone's gonna make it, and that's okay. You don't need to sit there and be like, "Ha ha, you suck." But it's more of like, all right, I can't sit here and just drill into everyone's heads about this. Like it's not gonna work that way. And I have to accept that and I can just do my best. And that's okay.
Exactly. Exactly. Just do your best. I think that should be the theme of this podcast is
That's
just
what it
like
should be. Do your
just
best.
wake up and do your best to be a good
Yeah.
human every
Fear and
day.
comfort. Fear and comfort. Do your best. And I'll
Honesty.
yes. Now, I want to ask one simple question and we're going to wrap up the show here. Because we initially talked about video games and the psychology of those games. I got to ask you, Miranda. I don't know. I don't remember if you said this on Spirit Week. Um, what is your favorite video game that has meant the most to you?
Oh wow, that's a really tough question.
I'll put you on the spot.
I will say the video game that definitely got me into gaming, that got me into game design was Dead Space. That game,
Really?
yeah, the Dead Space series was everything for me. I grew up on Xbox, so Halo was a big thing for me as well, but Dead Space was always my thing. However, I would have to say now my favorite video game, Detroit Become Human is my current favorite video game.
That's what I like to hear. That's
See,
what I like to hear.
I knew that you were gonna love that. And again, it comes down to like that game is so psychological. That
Oh,
game
it's so
puts
good.
so much pressure on you. And okay, super interesting fact to wrap up the show. In Korea, I just like learned about an article that was about this study that they held in Korea. A bunch of professors in Korea, including someone from biomedicine, computer engineering, and the nursing school over in Korea. They had developed a virtual reality 360-degree video that basically helped to teach nursing students about schizophrenia, and it ran similarly to Detroit Becomes Human and a lot of
Wow.
other and a lot of other point and click games where it literally gave a dialogue and you had to choose an option that would relate to a consequence or to an action. And it was really engaging, and it taught a lot of those nursing students about schizophrenia and how to handle someone with schizophrenia. So I think that's another reason I love games like that, is because it teaches like real world consequences. It teaches how important words are, how important dialogue is and actions, and it makes you accountable for your actions. And I think that that's another really great educational skill.
No, it's well, I gotta say one thing. Number one, the original Dead Space is my absolute favorite horror game of all time. The original
Absolutely.
Dead
The
Space.
Oh my gosh, the horror design in that game is just whatever. It's
Fantastic.
amazing.
I I'm not a big fan of the sequels. Two's good. Three not is less of a horror game, more of an action game. But I don't
Agreed.
talk about it enough. I love Dead Space. That game's scary. Um, now I so I remember when Detroit came out. I was excited because it was made by the folks who did Heavy Rain, and Heavy Rain is
Yes,
also a very very choose your own adventure type of ordeal. But the difference
absolutely.
between Heavy Rain and Detroit is the fact that Heavy Rain is like a thriller. So there's
Definitely.
like this scary psychological feeling to it, but it's not like I don't want to say teaching you something, but it does teach you like, oh, your actions do have weight to what you do and how they influence the story.
Right.
Detroit really nails this whole concept of what it means to be a human being. And
Exactly.
I think that just does it so well. And I will say this up front. I is not my favorite game of all time. It is on my top 10 list, but Detroit Become Human has the best story of any video game, in my opinion.
I
Um,
Yeah, I would back that up. I really would. That and Life is Strange. Those two games taught me so much about empathy. And I think the most interesting theme in Detroit Becomes Human is the idea of like you will begin to feel empathy for a machine. And what does that mean
exactly.
for you? And that goes back to like I did my capstone in CGT off of like the Turing test and Mary in the Black and White Room, those two
Oh,
theories.
wow.
So it means a lot to me to the idea of like what makes an artificial intelligence not human and how do we still feel empathy for those things.
That's why I love Connor. Connor's such a good character in that game. I
Oh
think
my gosh.
he does an incredible, like his Brian Descartes, I believe, is the actor. He does a fantastic job really representing this character that's literally going through this. Well, and actually, it's not even just that; it's also the player making the choices of watching this robot essentially want to either become have emotions or stay based off of the program scripting. And like when you're going to do that, how does that look? Like
Like,
like, how does that, like, when you see someone not have emotions and do the thing that they're programmed to do, like, what is that actually repercussion on you as a human being? And
exactly.
as someone who has the platinum trophy, who has seen every single ending in Detroit Become Human, I can say that there's some endings in that game that I don't like. Not because they're bad, because they hurt to watch. Um,
Exactly, yeah. Yeah,
so,
I totally
uh,
agree.
but
And I think it's just I don't know. I think the whole visualization of when any of the AIs actually do break through their programming, the visualization of that is really beautiful. Like
oh, it's
breaking
awesome.
through the imaginary wall. And I think that even a human can relate to that, breaking through your programming, what you've been told is right and wrong. I think that is so monumental. I just think it's beautiful how they did it.
No, I absolutely I remember the particular scene when Marcus is doing it. I think that
Oh
one
my
hit me that
gosh.
one hit me the hardest because
I
that one's
cried.
just so well done. The music's great, and like actually showing Marcus like beating down the wall is just so
Exactly.
great.
And
Um,
it made me literally cry. Like the leading up to it. I don't want to spoil it if anyone's
yeah, no,
listening
no,
and
we're
has
not gonna
not
spoil
played
anything.
it.
Go play the freaking game.
Right.
So
Go
good.
play the game if you haven't played it. It's amazing.
Please, it's
It'll
on PC for all you PC nerds. Um,
exactly. Oh yeah, I ended up playing it on PC after we discussed that, by the way, because I had
nerd.
to. A nerd.
Yeah, you use TurboTax on your PC, nerds.
A nerd. But yeah, I
Exactly.
just
Okay,
love
I'm sitting here talking about I'm a PlayStation fanboy over here. But
okay, but same. I'm still a PlayStation fanboy. I feel you 100%. It's okay, Luke.
good, good, good.
But I
You can
do
join
just
the
this
PlayStation army. Um,
exactly. And like just the story leading up for every single one of the artificial intelligence, like when they were breaking the wall and choosing to break the wall, every story leading up to it made you feel that powerful movement of empathy. It made you
right.
feel like what it must be like to be a machine. I don't know. And the comparisons between a human and machine, it's just something that's always thrilled me.
I think it even goes beyond a machine too, to some extent. Like, yeah, obviously the machine like caring about something that's not alive, but like also like watching like someone who's seen people really struggle with their lives and like watching them become alive again. Like that's also
Clay.
super powerful too. Like watching someone literally bring themselves back to life is
Oh my
incredible.
gosh. Yeah, and that's such a good way to put that and such a good a metaphor and analogy for that. Like I just a couple weekends ago I just went to a wedding of a friend I grew up with in high school that I almost like watched them take their lives and now they're married and happy. Like even that can be an analogy for breaking through that wall and just how
Wow.
beautiful like coming back into yourself. Yeah. Super cool. Super cool
Yeah.
analogy
Yeah.
there.
No, that's man, there are some beautiful things in this world, and I sometimes I have to take a step back and just remember how magical watching someone grow is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah,
that's
that's
what
why.
I want to I think that's why we both keep doing what we're doing.
I think so too, and that's a great way to end up wrapping up this show. Miranda, you have been an absolutely wonderful guest. You have been such a positive splash on this show. I really appreciate you being here. I do want to say, you want to plug anything before we take off, as I do with all my guests.
I usually have a website ready, but right now it's under construction. So I have a LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Miranda Shuler. Shuler is Shuler. You can find me there. It's the closest thing I have to a plug.
I'll put her name in the title of the show. So if you don't know how to spell things like me, you will be able to see it. So please go give Miranda a look. She has done wonderful things for this show. In terms of doing obviously providing her voice is the main thing of the show, but also doing this awesome logo for the YouTube and the podcast. So I want to give Miranda
Oh,
another um round of applause through the microphone. I really do appreciate all the stuff
it's
that you've done.
just making me blush over here. It's my pleasure.
No, no. It's just me. I'm just a dude that does things and lives and breathes.
Same.
But thank you again. I'm probably gonna have you back on the show at some point. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you
What
so much for having me.
Very welcome. And I guess that'll be it for the show, everyone. So until next time, I hope you enjoy what we brought to the table. And we'll see you folks on the next episode of the podcast.